Let's start. Thank you very much. Let me make a few comments on what we have just heard. In the last part of the morning session, up to lunchtime, we have to discuss how to establish enterprises. There is confounding information, though, I must say the truth. We've always thought that country is a country of creative and highly capable small and medium-sized enterprises which can reproduce themselves. Instead, we saw this morning that there's only 1% propensity to establishing a business, so a very small percentage. We need to understand what has taken place in the last 10 years and also which companies we're talking about. Because if we're talking about enterprises which have a dragging capacity, dragging with them the entire system, they are extremely important and necessary. Instead, there are enterprises which survive the old model and all that are actually following it. In the discussion that we will have later, we will have to really reflect on the meaning of words. There's a video first. We'll watch the video first and then start reflecting on what people think of doing business. Can we have the video?
Sì, non ho nominato Carlo perché Carlo è stato trattenuto da impegni impensabili.
Micway ha un business model innovativo focalizzato sul mondo lifestyle ed action sport, per cui su tutto quel mondo dei pazzi che fanno delle cose strane a livello sportivo e che lo vivono non solo come una passione ma come uno stile di vita. C'è un cuore tecnologico che prevede appunto il trasferimento di tecnologia da ambiti della meccanica più avanzata verso ambiti crescenti, nascenti. Poi c'è la parte commerciale che è Milky Shop, che prevede la realizzazione di un sito di riferimento quantomeno a livello europeo per tutti quei materiali che sono difficilmente reperibili e che servono alla pratica di action sport. E poi c'è un'anima di community che è un po' il motore di tutto il modello di business, con delle logiche di valorizzazione delle attività che loro fanno sulla community come sconti sul negozio. Il mio concetto di imprenditore prima era quello di Zio Paperone, Berlusconi, Agnelli, cioè erano dei concetti un po' stereotipati. Non pensavo, e su questo ritorno un po' anche sul ruolo della scuola, che ci potesse essere fra il novero delle possibilità che uno studente ha quando finisce di studiare, di fare un'impresa. Era una cosa totalmente fuori dalle mie corde. La spinta con cui sono partito è stata una spinta dovuta alla volontà di vendere un brevetto, fondamentalmente. E da lì poi in realtà mi è stato spiegato che in realtà si poteva creare un'azienda, che è un'azienda una cosa interessante, faticosa, però alla fine ho trovato la mia strada, penso, cosa che non avrei trovato da dipendente, probabilmente. Dunque, il ruolo dell'università per il progetto Milky Way non è stato diretto, è stato un ruolo indiretto, perché sicuramente le conoscenze che abbiamo acquisito nel percorso di studi sono state fondamentali e su questo non c'è dubbio, anche in relazione a magari compagni esteri con cui ci si confronta e così. In Italia abbiamo un'ottima preparazione, a mio avviso. Dal punto di vista invece della formazione dell'impresa, l'università secondo me potrebbe fare di più nel momento in cui spiega agli studenti o ai laureandi che c'è questa possibilità di fare delle imprese, anche partendo da nulla. Noi in realtà poi siamo stati aiutati indirettamente dall'università perché la fondazione Demo Center è partecipata dall'università, per cui siamo rimasti in ambito universitario, fra virgolette, però non è una concausa diretta, è un ecosistema che ha lavorato per darci sicuramente una mano determinante. Senza il Demo Center non saremmo qua. I problemi in azienda, in particolare in startup, sono all'ordine del giorno, più volte al giorno, sovrapposti, incrociati, trasversali, cioè ce n'è ovunque e in ogni dove. Noi abbiamo dovuto far fronte a tantissimi problemi, anche oggi li affrontiamo, però non mi sento di essere un caso isolato, cioè è la normalità, in azienda i problemi vanno affrontati e risolti. Chiaramente ci sono dei problemi organici che secondo me sono inevitabili, poi ci sono dei problemi che a mio avviso potrebbero essere molto evitati se ci fosse un approccio da parte delle istituzioni, da parte della struttura del paese, diciamo, che ti dà una mano. Questa cosa qua in questo momento, nei 3 anni che hanno preceduto questo momento, non l'ho percepita grandemente. Se tornassi indietro farei sicuramente la scelta di creare Milky Way, non ho nessun tipo di dubbio. Ovviamente farei forse centinaia di errori in meno, spero, di quelli che ho fatto, perché gli errori quando si fa qualcosa non si contano più, se ne fanno tutti i giorni, l'importante è non rifarli 2 volte. Per cui se tornassi indietro cercherei di non farli 2 volte.
Allora, Domenico Mauriello.
Domenico Mauriello, Laura, and Allessandro Laterza.
Allora, il primo punto è questo. Questo discorso della
First point, creating businesses, establishing enterprises, and reconsidering the role of universities. This is the trend of the GDP of the emerging countries and the rest of the world from 1980 to 2015. You see that a lot has changed since the end of last century. The trend between emerging countries and developed countries has reversed. You see that starting at the end of the 90s, there was a major worldwide recovery, which was driven by China, India, and Brazil. Then there was the crisis, which hit emerging countries and developed countries in different ways. And then there was a double dip, which affected all, and then the recovery. Let's add Italy to this chart in orange. Now take a sigh. It's good for you to do this because, as you can see, from the end of the 80s, we have always had the lowest growth rates worldwide, and we are below the average for developed countries. We were more affected by the crisis of 2001. Actually, we felt this crisis in 2003 because there were the devaluation effects already. And you see that the second dip is certainly more significant for us than for other countries. Now, this chart relates directly to what Mr. Camelli said this morning. There is structural weakness in our country. It is linked to the weakness of human resources. We have been thinking for years that we were a country of poets and navigators with no need for innovation. In its survey, Banca Italia concentrated very much on this. What they said was that starting from the end of last century, the idea of growth without a school is no longer true. Basically, In the past, there was a group of small and medium-sized enterprises which could grow based on the transfer of knowledge from one generation to the other. It's not just a problem of the society of knowledge, but it's a problem of using all the tools available to us and understanding more at the present time than in the past, because the world is more complex than it used to be. Another important element is to build up social capital. This is achieved through sharing knowledge. The fact that one knows and the others don't know is no longer applicable today. We have to share knowledge to create social capital, which is an element for stability. Based on this, the price we pay is that at European level, we are basically regarded among the first of the C League. Well, it's a good result. It's a great achievement because we could even be the last of the C League. We are the first, but still we are in the C League. Look at the innovation scoreboard. You can ask your children to explain this. Simply think of the iPad. This has a large impact on our country. After many years of euro, many years of globalization, 7 years of crisis, the structural conditions of our country have changed dramatically. So the final map is that part of the country is more integrated with the Rhineland area of Germany, and part of the country is even less integrated. And here we're back to the issue of the south of the country. And I'm asking you, the problem of the south of Italy is now crucial again because it's very far from the rest of Europe. Dark green is Germany and its neighboring countries. Light green is France and the UK. In yellow, it's us and Portugal and the Mediterranean countries. And in orange, you have Eastern Europe. Now, this is the real spread, if you like. This is the innovative capacity spread, which was superimposed to the financial one. This is something that we did with UniCredit. If you take the production cycles and within one or within each production cycle, you spread out the various production steps, you have an initial step where you look for raw materials, you take care of logistics, you do R&D at industrial level. Then you have one first processing step down to the final production and assembly with distribution as the final step. Well, this was a survey by UniCredit and Prometea. The country is very weak. Our country is very weak in sourcing and distribution. The market has opened up very much because of the globalization process. So what is important is not the companies, but their activities, what they do within their sectors. Because, you know, a large market makes scale economies thrive in the initial and last part. This is of strategic importance. Where can we develop? You know, with our type of companies, we become good subcontractors, providing quality components, or in advanced mechanics, we can also become the managers of distribution networks because the whole chain becomes shorter. So design, manufacturing and distribution are much closer to each other. But you have to be careful. It depends on the policies, because, you know, if you take certain head pieces of the system, it's different from taking the tail pieces. And one thing is to talk about policies reducing the cost of labor or policies increasing the added value. I think this is of great importance. Not only do we have to invest more in research and education throughout the system, but we have to convert all this into higher added value. Not just more education is required, but this education should be spread out in a much larger way. We need new companies providing stimulation and driving the system to aim at a very high level. I'll now show you 3 charts which reflect our country. This is the overall turnover of our enterprises, which is split into 2 parts. The turnover for the foreign market. So it's the turnover that our companies achieve with the foreign markets. And you see, our companies increase exactly the same rate as the German companies. And this is the turnover for selling on the domestic market. You know, a country cannot grow simply because it's driven by the exports. We need to focus on the domestic market again. By putting these figures together, you see that the system as a whole doesn't grow. Exporting companies can be as competitive as the German companies are, but they're not so numerous as to drive the entire country. So we need to start to increase the number of companies which, even if small, export their products. Let me mention the concept of small enterprises. If the efficiency depends on specialization and integration of functions, it means that if I'm very good at doing certain things independently, we can't go anywhere. But if we do things very well independently, but all these things complement each other, then we can do something great. So if we take these 2 elements, we come up with 4 possibilities. In yellow, you see low specialization, low relation companies, companies that don't complement each other. In the south, there are many companies working on their own. It was suggested that this was a way of filling a gap. On the other side, you have high specialization, highly complementing companies. They are key towards driving the whole system towards an open market. Then we have high specialization companies with just a few customers, that is the subcontractors. Last but not least, we have low specialization companies which work in a low standard context. In our country, we have to, first of all, strengthen our industrial districts from yellow to pink, from pink to green. Or we may focus on major subcontractors from yellow to orange to green, or try to push the whole system up. What is clear is that we don't need establishing startups only. We need a special type of startup, the one which is research-based, because research-based companies have high specialization and also have the ability of integrating each other. There are a few distinctions to make. What can universities do to make enterprises grow? This is one thing. And what can universities do for helping enterprises move around and act in an open economy, allowing also the others to grow? And what can universities do to increase the number of companies in the green area? Those which take research and convert it into a core which is at the basis of growth for the whole system. We have to make these distinctions because there are different policies involved. To make the companies of the yellow area grow, you simply need some incentives or simplifying things. To make companies grow in the pink and green area, you need more. For example, common services. To make companies grow in the sea area, you need to accompany them in exports. To make the D area grow, you need the involvement of enterprises and also a long-term view, which is research transferred into the business system. Now, unfortunately, I have given you a realistic picture of where we currently are as a country. Secondly, we need to act on all these four fronts. Last but not least, the D part of the diagram is of crucial importance. Let's start. Laura Ramaciotti, what are the universities doing in order to start moving in the D part of the diagram? It's a very clear question, Laura. What are they doing, or what are they supposed to do? What should they do?
Well, the university in the last 10 years are in fact thinking about this question of technological transfer, in fact, more than just thinking. 2 national bottom-up associations have been set up. In other words, not necessarily prompted by government development and impetus. They're cousins, if you like, these 2 associations. They look to training in technological transfer, train university people who should then assist undergraduates and graduates to transfer technology and also to set up companies. The other is, in fact, one which is much more dedicated to startups with national awards for the best. These are associated to Netvals, and they represent 75% of the available university staff to do this. And so these 2 associations have, in fact, been dedicated to this sort of transfer. We have reached a conclusion because we have about 1,100 companies which have been derived from research. We've reached a sort of threshold, but as Maurizio said, in fact, the procedure is rather slow, and not just in terms of quantity, but also size. You know, the sort of startup is small, and we're a long way from the quadrant B. So a great deal still has to be done in terms of specialization and complementarity and the growth of the volume of the individual spin-off that is actually created thanks to university research. And also entrepreneurial culture is insufficient, both within the university and also on the part of our graduates. For example, one of the associate colleagues, Pnicube, says that transferring technology, despite my university, the fact that with my university it is difficult, but in fact doing this transfer against my university, well, that's impossible. And in other words, the entrepreneurial orientation of the university itself as a body still leaves a lot to be desired. Netval, one of the association, produces a report and gives the amount of technological transfer that the universities have in fact achieved. The report tends to say that in fact the universities have 1.5% people which are the motors, if you like, that should be looking after this sort of strategic transfer, one full-term person and one part-time person. So that's completely insufficient. And also the lack of entrepreneurial spirit on the part of young people, young graduates, is another question. We don't really have people who, or a lot of people who, in fact, are truly willing to go for an independent, self-employed sort of employment, both in the scientific and in the arts field. And they should be encouraged right from when they are undergraduates to do this. And also in the single course specialist university degree courses, this again is not seen very widely. So those that in fact tend to go for the sorts of disciplines that would be an obvious, or where self-employment might be an obvious outlet. In fact, these people are still too few, and the entrepreneurial spirit is not really there. In certain meetings, it has been said, of course, that the legislation regarding intellectual property should be changed as well. And in fact, the fact that patents are not fully enhanced. There's also the question of the fact that these spin-offs are too small, and that very often they are consultancies which are developed. Intellectual property is also a topic that our undergraduates and graduates know and understand very little of. And after 5 years or 4 years, or the 3+2 degree course in science and technology, very many graduates leave the university without really understanding what a patent is and how inventions, in fact, can be protected and enhanced. Obviously, simplification of the red tape would be a good idea for all Italian companies, not just startups, and certainly greater impetus here would, I'm sure, consider and increase the number of pioneer new graduates in trying to go alone. Very often they are put off by the weight of administrative procedures that have to be gone through. Now, these are the things that are said again and again in the various meetings and round tables where we meet with policymakers as university staff. But again, we've said it, but it doesn't really seem to be coming into effect. Thank you. Now, if we have, as part of the degree course, specific courses on what it means to be an entrepreneur and how to become an entrepreneur. And this rather goes against the saying, at least in Italy, that one has to be born an entrepreneur. Whereas I think this is something you can learn within Netval and Pnicube. How do you see this? mentality as an entrepreneur? Can you become an entrepreneur? Can you learn to be an entrepreneur? Yes, I think that these specific university courses on what being an entrepreneur is, on the enhancement of intellectual property and so on, would be a very good idea. In fact, are necessary, because not only should a person understand what an entrepreneur is and how an entrepreneur is run, but once and if he gets the idea of producing a particular service on his own, he has to have the tools to be able to actually put this into practice. So these cross-cutting courses or specific courses within the range of a university course, I think is a minimum that we should be offering our undergraduates. The comment was out of mic. I'm sorry. Please don't worry. I mean, it's very true that when people say, and politicians say, you know, don't worry, we should be worried. But yes, we've got your message. We should, in fact, be having these courses. And also the question of work experience or apprenticeships. Can this sort of possibility bring people closer to the idea of being an entrepreneur? Well, I think a work experience or apprenticeship is a way of going about things. In other words, a person gets a body of theoretical understanding and skill, and work experience allows him or her to have first-hand knowledge and complement his basic set of theoretical knowledge, and it will allow him to have a minimum understanding of what being part of a business is. Now, seeing things from the entrepreneurial point of view, how do you see things? And I ask this of the representative. Now, this means, of course, that we have to help to develop data. We have to develop understanding on the part of graduates, that they can fully understand how they can become part of and fit into our industrial system. Now, I have been invited as a representative of the Chambers of Commerce. Enterprise creation, of course, is one of our key projects, and we have accompanied more than 13,000 young people to, in fact, set up on their own, and many of these whom we gave training to actually did set up their company. And I think this has to be increasingly developed. Also, thanks to IT, we have to also reach out to other types as well, women and so on, partnerships and so on. And the Chambers of Commerce with the university are developing a lot of initiatives to sustain young people that want to develop a company or go out on their own. And in fact, the key point which brings us together is that we, thanks to our archives, can in fact have a very clear-cut view of what actually is happening in the economy. And I say this to our foreign guests, especially in Italy. We have a companies register in Italy, and any company that is set up is recorded, and we in this register indicate certain features of any new company, and we also send out to new companies being formed a questionnaire to try and understand what their needs are as they start up. Now, we have seen from these data collected and from this questionnaire exactly how things stand. And in fact, we have seen every year how many companies are set up by graduates. In 2013, in fact, these are unpublished data, which we'll be publishing later. 2013, almost 33,000 companies have been set up by graduates. Now, these companies are what are called, not really called, they're true new companies. I mean, it's not the passage of a company from one generation to another, or a company which has a link with an already existing company. So we're talking about real new companies. So 1 out of 7 is created by graduates. And I think that's a significant piece of information to start off with. But unfortunately, these graduates are people who, in fact, have graduated some time ago. So only, in fact, 22% of them are set up by very young graduates. So in other words, you're not born an entrepreneur. You have to learn to become an entrepreneur. And in fact, very often we see the number of people who start a self-employment career, if you like, after a period of being an employee or at least having some experience. They go out on a limb, as it were, after they've had a certain maturing of their skills. And in other words, they don't go from the university to setting up on their own. And a graduate who sets up an entrepreneur's doesn't do so except in a very small percentage of cases because he's desperate to have a job. He sets up a company because really this is a mission that he has given himself, and he does this to enhance his skills to the greatest effect, and to put into practice what he has learned at university. He also has the sense of wanting to affirm himself and assert himself. This definitely comes out from the questionnaire. Only 2.4% of our graduates who, in fact, set up a company do this in the wake of its incentives being given. An incentive, in other words, is not sufficient. This is what we are told by our data. Another piece of negative information: where are these graduates that set up a country? Very much in urban areas where they have their universities, and in Milan, Turin, and Rome. It's negative and positive because it shows us that where there are good universities, there is a greater propensity on the part of graduates to set up on their own. Because, in fact, many of the graduates, in fact, set up a company within the advanced services sector. So there's a greater propension to go for higher technology and innovative technology, and also there's a greater propensity of graduates to go into the green technology, 19% in fact. So innovation and green innovation is a very specific feature of these graduates setting up on their own. Another thing that we have mentioned, there's a greater capacity of the graduates being able to link in with the university would be necessary, and again, less red tape, because these graduates always complain about the lack of help and the excessive procedures that have to be gone through. So what are the main avenues that we should pursue in terms of enterprise creation? Well, first of all, fewer incentives, but a better development of helping and making the environment more helpful to the graduates wanting to set up. In other words, banks that are willing to loan and to help people wanting to be to set up on their own. Very few are able to get loans from banks. Also, the Chamber of Commerce system should help here in the red tape that has to be gone through and that the new entrepreneur has to tackle. And then also the university. What came out from the survey was that the world of production and manufacturing has to be brought much closer to the university, and there should be cross-fertilization of the various university sectors with the manufacturing area, and that will help to develop those cross-cutting skills and which graduates need. In other words, not their specific technological skills, but problem-solving, business acumen, and so on. This is something which the chambers of commerce, the trade associations can help develop in partnerships with the university. We're doing this in Naples, Reggio Calabria, and in Milan to indicate that we're not just working in the more developed parts of our country, but also in the south as well, with a view to trying to develop this sort of cross-fertilization. I don't know when you have whether you have seen the garage where Google was born, or the shed in Sweden where IKEA was born. And I would hope that I'd be able to show a picture of a similar facility in the depths of Reggio Calabria and say, well, this is where this particular company was born. Okay, thank you. Mauriello says, well, there's a specific piece of information that we have to underline and realize that high-tech startups, in fact, aren't born thanks to incentives and so on, but also because of the particular situations. They are born in urban centers, in the center, and also the center north, and also because there are services available to startups that want to get going. I mean, how do you see this in the Italy of today? Not the Italy of 1861, when Italy became a country, a nation. Thank you very much. Now, I'll try to be very quick. The first consideration is to look at our economic situation today. We have all heard that, in fact, we're actually out of the recession, but unfortunately, the precipice has just sort of gone down further down the road. It's still there, and we can go over it. But I have the impression, and I'm sure that it will be in fact confirmed by the statistics, and that is that the crisis still today is there in terms of the fact that there has been very strong polarization. In other words, there is a group, some people 1/3, some people see more this as being a higher percentage, whatever. But there is a group of companies which is, I won't say prospering, but which is climbed out of the crisis. And then there is a whole other set of companies throughout the country, which is not necessarily just in difficulty, but which in fact is on its deathbed, practically, is almost about to go to the wall. So we see that there are, in some cases, small symptoms of recovery. But this year, especially, it will be a jobless recovery. And this is something which is very difficult to explain to others and to ourselves. Now, my personal opinion, and we'll see whether I'm right or not as time unfolds, but I think that companies are reacting, and some of them are reacting better than others. Of course, the exporting companies are reacting better, but I don't think it's just that. I think that there is a cohort of companies which probably in this magical triangle that you have described in Italy. And these companies are perhaps companies which are linked to the international network, but they're not necessarily international companies on their own. But anyway, they have an ability of a very special nature. In other words, they are climbing out of the country not only because they have internalized and they're linked into the international network, but especially because they are highly innovative. I think that in whatever company or whatever sector they're in, these enterprises are those that have been able to change their business model and have made innovation a stable feature of their entrepreneurship. And whoever directs them, I think, whether they be graduates or not, this is what they're doing. And I think that's a positive thing. Second thing, we can ask ourselves, do young people want to set up on their own and form a company? I mean, I'll take from a speaker that spoke before. Well, I don't think it's true that young people are shy of setting up on their own, because if I've seen the first quarter of 2013 and also the last quarter, we see that many companies were set up by under 30s, and I'm talking about everything. 40% of these SMEs are building companies, catering companies, also structural steel companies and so on, and carpentry and so on. And 2/3 of these 100,000 companies are set up by young people. So very often, I agree, it is people who can't find a job and therefore set up on their own and say, well, I'll try. And in fact, most of these companies, as we have heard in the south, the province which in fact is ahead of this is Vibo Valencia in the deep south of Italy. And the province which has the lowest number of new companies set up by young people is Trieste in the northeast. But anyway, these data show us that young people with whatever sort of qualification are going for self-employment, and perhaps it is a fallback solution because they can't find a job elsewhere. Now, we have said that a large number of average number of graduates at 5 years say that they have set up, and in fact, it's an average number. It's not a lot, but it's not a little either. What should be underlined here? I think that if we look at avant-garde and innovation companies, well, we see that very often they're spin-offs from the university and so off. And when they, in fact, sign on to the Chamber of Commerce, they have to have the particular prerequisites to be able to classify it as technological spin-offs. And here there are not many new companies in this specific technological spin-off field. They are spread very generally around the country, and 1,600 are the numbers. How many companies do we have in Italy? 6 million. So we're talking in terms of numbers, a drop in the ocean, but I think they're fundamental drops in the ocean. I say this very crudely, and I think that where we have to make headway is to get the bank system interested in this. UniCredit, Italy's biggest bank, has a project which is called, which is linked to startup, and we are also looking at larger companies, Fancredem, San Paolo, as well as UniCredit, in fact, have developed programs, similar programs. But then again, banks, aren't in fact charitable institutions, however. But they are doing something to grant credits and loans. So where there is the sensation that there is recovery, and where there is the idea that credits could be well distributed, and here they see young people developing technological startups, and they are very interested in that sort of startup. And they're not so much interested in past data of the company or whatever, but in future prospects of the company. Now, with regard to what the university can do to promote entrepreneurship and the transfer of technology and so on, there are two things which, if you like, are very easily and glib to say, but more difficult to put into practice. The first thing that the Minister Galletti said, and something I don't really agree with, and that is that when we assess the university, if we've also looked at the quality of research, and I don't think that the ability to create jobs has been measured and assessed and also rewarded. And that's something that should be done on the part of the government also, to give rewards to endeavors which create jobs, or to place graduates. Greater incentives to the university should be forthcoming if they do, in fact, create placements. And if we look at a national level, in fact, this is still too small an initiative. And then also, we should, in fact, further develop, in fact, work experience. The Manufacturers Association are thinking of shifting Erasmus to companies. And in fact, that's not as easy as it sounds, of course. It's not just the large companies that should be involved. I mean, a large company that can take on 30 people on work experience. You have to be able to investigate this within smaller companies that can only take one. And also the south of Italy should be further developed and further studied. In fact, the south of Italy, in fact, is the last home of Fordist-type companies. For example, we know that Fordist sort of industrial systems, not the winning systems today. So we have to think about what sort of transformation can be developed there. In the north, for example, if you looked at that so-called Series C, of innovation, well, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, and so on, are very go-ahead in this sense. And that's, of course, part of the German-speaking world. And here you have to be very careful, especially vis-à-vis our northeast. And with regard to the south, people want to, I just said that 50–80% of the universities should be closed in the south because, in fact, they don't come up to scratch and their budget is completely awry and so on. But I think we have to come up with a policy here, because we can't shift everything perhaps to Ferrara. I'd like to now screen the other video.
No, ti dico l'altro video, scusami.
Che dice Cammelli, quanto è bello Cammelli.
Per gestioni idee nuove e geniali in Emilia-Romagna. Noi siamo 5 socie, 5 donne, tutte con meno di 30 anni, e nel 2012 abbiamo coniato il crowdfunding territoriale, legando questo strumento che sfrutta la potenzialità del web, delle logiche liberali e di condivisione appunto di internet, unendo le reti degli stakeholder, la comunità, le istituzioni sul territorio. Il progetto di cui andiamo più fieri, che ci sta illuminando moltissimo riguardo al crowdfunding, è Un passo per San Luca. È il primo progetto di crowdfunding civico in Italia. Il bene comune è il portico di San Luca, che è un monumento simbolo della città di Bologna, il portico più lungo al mondo. Ad oggi abbiamo raccolto 140.000 euro, la campagna è cominciata da 3-4 mesi e durerà ancora 10 mesi. C'è un interessantissimo fermento culturale e imprenditoriale in Italia, dovuto al fatto che si vogliono fare delle cose belle, che il mercato del lavoro non offre moltissimo, quantomeno offre cose molto piatte. Per cui ecco, di sicuro grazie anche a una cultura data dalla nostra famiglia, una cultura di libertà e di ricerca rispetto a quello che è i nostri obiettivi professionali, le nostre soddisfazioni lavorative, abbiamo deciso di fondare una startup e di prenderci questo grandissimo impegno. Si parla moltissimo di startup in Italia in questo momento, ma anche nel mondo dell'università sarebbe più utile andare a vedere quali sono i problemi pragmatici, reali di un'azienda, di una startup in questo momento in Italia. Come si fa? All'università non ci hanno spiegato come si redige un contratto, cosa vuol dire un F24, che cosa significa diventare SRL o quanto INPS si paga quando si diventa amministratore di una società. Sono tutti problemi che possono fare la differenza nei primi anni di un'azienda. Ginger attualmente ha 2 sfide di fronte a sé. La prima è consolidare l'uso del crowdfunding, il buon uso di questo nuovo metodo di finanziamento che è una rivoluzione per le start-up, per le imprese creative, per aziende che hanno prototipazioni in programma. L'altra sfida è quella di diventare società, quindi di formalizzarci effettivamente. Attualmente noi siamo un'associazione culturale, ma la nostra attività commerciale sta di gran lunga prendendo piede rispetto all'attività istituzionale. Il mercato ci chiede di diventare grandi e per cui noi dobbiamo fare questo passo. Noi abbiamo partecipato a 3 bandi da quando siamo nati e 2 li abbiamo vinti. Solo che il bando non può essere l'unica forma di aiuto da parte delle istituzioni. Anche se più che aiuto dalle istituzioni noi chiediamo di toglierci ostacoli dal percorso, per cui meno burocrazia, meno tasse e sì, questo già potrebbe essere un grandissimo aiuto e una forza per noi. Di sicuro ci manca l'esperienza e non troviamo in effetti delle persone che ci possono aiutare, che ci danno la solidità di una consulenza importante. In questo momento non si capisce quali possono essere gli strumenti migliori, che tipo di forma giuridica prendere. Lo scenario attuale in cui ci troviamo a lavorare, la crisi economica, questo alto peso delle tasse sugli utili, diciamo che non aiutano a essere ottimisti, ma il mercato ci sta chiedendo di proseguire, per cui noi assolutamente ci prenderemo questa responsabilità e proseguiamo. Se tornassimo indietro lo rifaremmo gli stessi errori che abbiamo fatto e in un anno siamo cresciuti, credo, più di 5 anni, tutto in una volta, per cui sì, ben venga, ci stiamo divertendo moltissimo.
Sì, mi sembra che Ginger alla fine...
I think that Ginger has sort of summarized the outcome of this discussion. Let me reiterate 3 points. One was also mentioned by Ginger when she said that small enterprises are fine, but you can't be a startup for 5 years. You can be a startup for 6 months or 1 year. You cannot be young all the time. You're young only when you're young. And also having tools available to know what is happening is something we should consider. I think we have to consider the possibility of being helped by mentors to see how things can be simplified. You know, the idea of using senior experts to help young people is a good idea. Now, people don't like about speaking of old people, but the time will come for old people to also help the others. Now, what is AlmaLaurea doing? It's doing an extraordinary work. First of all, it's making numbers and figures available to all. What AlmaLaurea did was to extend these surveys and also these services, not just or from the degrees to the diplomas, and also the guiding service, Alma Orientate, is very good. The idea that AlmaLaurea is a great compass available to individuals and to the country as a whole is a very important idea, which I think should be supported by all. Let's support it, but also the regional authorities should do this. So we'll talk about this after lunch. Thank you.